Welcome to Global Design Forum at London Design Festival. I'm Greg Williams, the editor of Wired UK. I'll be moderating the session today, Introduction to the Circular Economy. This is the first of 5 sessions happening daily this week as part of the Circular Design Project, a collaboration between LDF, SAP and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation to give unique insights into the global circular economy. We have 3 experts with us today who have deep expertise in the critical role of design in shaping a circular future. Welcome everyone. If you don't mind, actually, sorry, there's 4 experts, not 3, apologies. If you don't mind, we'll go around and everyone can introduce themselves and maybe just give a couple of minutes on a high-level view of your involvement with the circular economy. So I'm going to go around as people are stacked up on my screen, if that's okay. So no favoritism. So Andrew, maybe you could start us, please.
Hi, I'm Andrew Morley. I'm the Chief Executive of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We were set up 10 years ago, really with the sole mission of accelerating the transition to a circular economy. And we have around 170 people working on this based on the Isle of Wight and in various locations around the world. And essentially, we develop and promote the idea of a circular economy.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Tim, you're next up on my screen. If you don't mind introducing yourself and giving us some high-level thoughts, please.
Sure. Hi, I'm Tim Brown, chair of IDEO, the design consulting organization based around the world. And you know, I think about design at its highest level is just the way that we shape our world to meet shape the world to meet our needs. It's sort of based on a definition from Herbert Simon, the Nobel laureate. And the way we do that has changed over recent decades in the sense that we can no longer just do that based on our desires and the profit of business. We have to do it based on making, through a lens of sustainability and equitability. And that's where the circular economy comes in. And, you know, I see by following the principles of the circular economy is the only way that we can create sustainable growth and retain the capacity for the planet to support humanity. And it's simply the biggest design challenge that design has in front of it for the next several decades.
Great, thank you, Tim. Daniel.
Daniel Schmidt, I'm SAP's Chief Sustainability Officer. I love that role, and I would like to build on what Tim just said. At the end, it's up to us now to reach out to the key stakeholder group of the designers in the world in order to provide them with the right tools, with the right data, with best practices in order to enable them to understand completely the concept of circularity. And circularity is so needed, and we need to accelerate here in order to really fulfill what is described in the plan of our United Nations with the Sustainable Development Goals. Just 10 years to go, yeah, and it's so ambitious, so we need to accelerate, and I look forward to today's conversation.
All right, let's try and make this the decade of delivery then. Finally, Lena, welcome.
Thank you very much. So my name is Lena Pripkovac. I work for Inter-IKEA Group, which includes the worldwide IKEA franchisor, the range development, supply, and some industries. And I'm delighted to be here. If you look into future of sustainability, it really starts with design thinking. With a vision to create better everyday life for the many people, we really understand that we need to tackle the big problems and the big dilemmas in the world. And it starts with design. And the circular design principles is just an added mindset into that. How can we actually look into a completely new, better design of the future? So very delighted to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Lena. So I think, Andrew, maybe you could kick us off. There will be people on today's session who maybe aren't familiar with the idea of the circular economy. So maybe you could give us a definition, you know, so we can work from there. That would be really useful.
Yeah, I mean, the circular economy is at its heart a really quite simple idea that we need to think about the way in which materials flow through the economy and how they're used as they flow through the economy. We think about 3 design principles. We need to design out waste and pollution. at the very beginning, upstream, we need to keep products and materials in use and used as long as possible by design again. And we need to ultimately regenerate natural systems. So the circular economy is really a systems view of the economy and the material part of that. But because it's a system view, it needs to take into account its interactions and interrelationships with everything that it interacts with. So, you know, we've seen with the COVID virus, for example, the point about interactedness coming to life very strongly, that, you know, we have a health challenge in the world that has dramatically impacted the global economy. And we've seen the importance of different groups of the economy, different parts of the economy, the key workers and the like, and the different impacts the disease is having on different parts of the economy, whether it's the developing world or the lower socioeconomic parts of the society that are getting impacted greater. So this interrelationship rather of the various parts of the economy is a crucial idea behind the circular economy as well. So if we can in fact keep the material economy, the materials in the economy out of natural systems by eliminating pollution, by keeping them in the system for much longer, we can have very dramatic impacts on the way in which we create value. There's trillions of dollars of opportunity to be created through this approach. We can keep natural systems, we can protect natural systems, stop them from becoming polluted with persistent byproducts of waste, such as plastics. We can actually lower the energy demand of the system and enable the transition to renewable energy more easily. We can much more efficiently and effectively use water and other parts of the economy, the soil, the land-based systems, etc. So all these interrelated benefits flow from the simple idea of keeping materials in the economy used for longer and more effectively. So that's really the basic idea of it. And we've done many technical reports in different sectors and different parts of the economy to show that it is in fact a very valuable opportunity. If we apply the design principles of a circular economy, we can actually create vast amounts of additional new value that represents effectively better growth. So we talk about the need to really create better growth through the application of circular economy principles. And you know, again, as we think about the pandemic and where we are at the moment, the need to restart the economy it's an ideal moment to think about how we can, in fact, restart it with a better trajectory towards a vision of something that the more we do economically, the better the world becomes. So I'll stop there, Greg.
Great, thank you. And Daniel, maybe you can kind of take the next question. Obviously, you're partnering with the foundation. What are you trying to achieve with the Circular Design Project?
First, we are extremely proud to support the London Design Festival and alongside the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. But the Circular Design Project itself, it aims to really engage the millions of designers around the world in the principles and the best practices of designing for the circular economy, just nicely outlined by Andrew. So we from SAP, we need to enable the insights and connectivity here is so important across the world's business ecosystems. Andrew just talked about industries, but if you think about a very pragmatic, simple example, which is not simple, think about single-use plastics used in packaging for consumer goods we purchase in a retail store. So you need to bring together the consumer brands, you need to bring together in the game the retailers, the waste management industry, the packaging industry. You need to consider the regulation, which is quite different from state to state, from country to country, which makes it quite complex. And then we need to enable as well the consumers making informed decisions. So with that project here, I believe we could do a tremendous job by really driving the acceleration towards circularity, and in particular, like I mentioned that at the beginning, addressing the key community here of the designers.
Right, and these are very powerful principles, and clearly there are, huge kind of appetite to really think about this issue. But I'm interested now to get your point of view, Lena, because the idea is obviously kind of quite abstract in some ways. How do you, if you've got 10,000 different products, you're designing on an industrial scale, how do you take an abstract idea and turn it into actions or guidelines for a large scale community, working with a lot of designers?
Yeah, I think, first of all, the designers are the key starting point, right? We need to design a whole new system. And I think the most inspiring part of this is that we can have the same horizon to what we actually want to do. So the importance is that we see the same future if many, many different professions and many different contributors are going to contribute to this. You can even do it within the company, right? You talked about all the needs in the society, but we also need to have the engineering understanding this. We need to have the designers guiding what the vision is that they see. We need to have the logistics set up. We need to have the new way of meeting the customers and changing of behaviors. There's so many aspects to this. And I think to make it practical, you need to almost go down by every piece of this to put together the big elephant. So the way we work with it on a more practical scale is that we have looked through our design principles. IKEA work with something called democratic design, where we look at 5 dimensions in everything we do. It's affordability, it's form, function, quality, and sustainability. Then we apply circularity to that as well, with mindset to actually think about it in a whole, kind of prolonging the products and materials in society. Then we have to look into our supply chain and actually shift. The big shift is shifting the materials to be renewable and recyclable materials until 2030. And then together with that, we need to look at how we can change the behaviors in people's homes. We are of course, a home furnishing company looking into how people live in their homes. And a circular society also requires changes in behaviors with customers. So with this, I would say that the way a design thinking can bring us to this is magic. You really have to have design thinking. And we need a lot of different professionals and a lot of actors to contribute to the same picture. And I think the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the whole idea of design can bring us to have that common future when we actually look for the same goal.
Thank you, Lena. Tim, I'd love to bring you in now. Can you just give us a sense, you work with so many different clients at IDEO. How is the principles of circular design different, or how is it connected to design approaches of the past?
Well, I mean, it's probably different in 2 major ways, at least in its sort of the reality of its application. The first is, of course, it is a systemic approach. And design hasn't always remembered to take a systemic approach. I mean, it is most abstract, of course. Design is systemic, but designers haven't always remembered that it's not just about the product itself, but where the product comes from, where the product goes to, all of the various moments in the life of a product that one needs to think about if we're talking about the design of a product, of course, or even when we start thinking about product service systems and the role of services to help products maintain their value for longer, for instance. So firstly, it's systemic, and that's more complex, right? So we're asking designers to engage with an approach which is just a little bit more complex. There are more factors that we're asking designers to consider. Now, the beauty of the circular economy, and and I've been interested in working in sustainability for many years, and after realizing quite early on in my career that my legacy as a product designer was many hundreds, if not thousands, of tons of landfill, which I wasn't too excited about. But in the early days of trying to engage with sustainability, the principles were so abstract, so complex. The idea of doing a life cycle analysis of a product I was designing just like hurt my head too much. It was just the beauty of the circular economy is that it's at its heart a very, very simple idea. It's like, how do we keep the things that we make in circular flows? And that's something we can intuitively get. Now, it's not always easy to achieve. It's a lot of detail. There's a lot of hard work that it takes, but the basic concept is very simple. And of course, that's where the other major difference is, because everything that we designed in the past was part of a linear flow. You know, we've thought about where do we get some materials from? And when I was trained as a product designer, for instance, I thought about, well, this thing I'm designing, should I make it out of metal, out of plastic? I didn't think about where that plastic was coming from. I just thought, I just need some plastic, right? And I'm going to design this thing, and it's going to be fantastic. It's going to be cool. It's going to be usable. And then I kind of maybe worried a little bit about where it went to next, but not a lot. And what we're asking ourselves to do is to convert that linear flow of sort of take, make, waste into a circular flow. Whereas Andrew said before, we're designing waste out of the system, and we're trying to keep these materials and these products in use for as long as possible. And ultimately, we're trying to design in a way that regenerates natural systems, perhaps through choices of materials or the way in which we go about keeping separate natural materials from man-made materials and handling them differently. And so, you know, we're asking designers to make some different choices. One of the other, I think, perspectives that we didn't necessarily take always was to worry too much about the complexity of the things that we're designing from a material sense. Whatever it took to make and you can see this in packaging. You look at so much, and Daniel was talking about single-use packaging, so much single-use packaging that's made out of complex materials. Layers of materials that are impossible to pull apart and recycle, or complicated sets of components that are put together for a function that might last moments, at least as far as the end consumer is concerned. And so we're asking ourselves to make better choices to end up with simpler approaches so that it's possible to make future use of these materials in easier ways.
Andrew,
would it be okay if I just simply build on what Tim said?
Please do.
Is that okay for you? Okay. Tim, well, you mentioned the coolness factor for designers. And I would like just to share that anecdote, what happened to me, how I felt, wow, that's cool. Because our 3 kids, they provide me with my birthday present. Yeah, and this was this one. And I first thought, wow, that is a nice surf short, a nice swimming short. Yeah, and then I read in it, it's purely made of recycled plastics coming from bottles. Yeah, and now I feel even more cool about it. Yeah, so that is a perfect example, and it's just great. And I didn't know that before I read it. So designers could think about how to make the overall product story more cool. And the other topic you referred to is about moving from products to services in some areas. And I could mention, Lena, that for you as IKEA, where you sell a lot of light bulbs. That could be, just put in that as an example, as a systematic change, moving from products to service. That is a complete game changer, because then you, as a provider of light, think about energy efficiency, think about renewables, think about a long-term life cycle of a lighting product, instead of selling products. Oh, and if it's broke, I can sell the new product. You know, that would be a different business model, which would be extremely helpful for circularity.
Yeah. Leila, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, sure. No, I think that's, of course, one of the things that we're looking through, the whole idea of selling a good night's sleep rather than a bed. And what does that mean? And do you like to share your bed with many people, or do you want to share it, you know, in certain ways? Because you could also lease and rent a bed, right? So there is a good opportunity there to think new, that I totally agree with. And I do think that that points to the fact that it's not just materials, even though that is a very complex and very important part of the circular society, is selecting the right materials and the right materials for the right function. And what we have maybe experienced a lot the last year is we've gone through all our products, as you mentioned, almost 10,000 products, to assess it for circularity. And to be able to see that if this product would be assessed as a circular product, what would it need to do? How would it need to change? And of course, the interesting thing there is that you can't see it in silos, as also was pointed out by Tim. It is how is this product going to be used? What function is it? How will people's behavior change when you have a refurbishment possibility, for example, or a reuse possibility? And what would it change if you actually lease it instead of owning it yourself? And I think we are at that point now where it's not just looking at all of these separately. It's not just leasing a product. That's a financial solution. It's not just putting a different type of materials into the product. Is this the systemic change of it? You as a customer will change if you buy a better night's sleep. How will then the bed be redesigned? And what materials would that entitle? So I think we are on a journey here where the better design is in center, and it is a systemic change, which is very exciting.
Andrew, if I could bring you back in at this point, Tim, Daniel, and Elaine have I think outlined something that's clearly, the challenge is complex, it's clearly systemic. How do you think we can roll this out at scale? Because that's the only way we're going to have real impact.
Well, I think we are seeing it being taken up by major businesses like IKEA and like SAP and like Unilever and Nestle, et cetera, We have in the foundation 1,100 businesses that we're working with. Many of these businesses are global businesses, and they have the ability to design and then industrialize solutions that can in fact scale globally, which is really, really interesting. But we also work with governments and cities all around the world. We work in learning and education as well. We work with startups and other NGOs. We have a network of around 1,700 organizations. And what we can see is that the learning agenda, I guess basically connecting the idea of a circular economy, this basic idea to the engine of industry and the engine of innovation and design gives you pretty much automatically a massive gearing and leverage to apply that into the global economy, and to see where we've got initial quite successful products and services, solutions emerging, how they then start to permeate across other parts, other products, other sectors. So that's the scaling approach that we think is really, really interesting here, because when you think about regulation and other approaches, they're important. They're absolutely important. Regulation for things like single-use plastics and putting in place economic incentives to start to level out the price of raw materials versus recycled materials. In a similar way, we've seen government interventions with things like feed-in tariffs and other sort of carbon pricing approaches that have helped the renewable industry take off over the last 15 or so years, to the point that we now have renewable energy at a price point that is comparable to petrochemical oil-based energy. So that was largely to do with a regulatory input. So regulation is really important for getting the markets to work. But the fact that we can drive the innovation through design in industrial systems globally, and we can have in parallel to that regulation that is starting to set the playing field up slightly differently all the way around the world through the different regulatory constituencies. So those things are important. I think the interesting point though is that almost all of the multinational companies we work with work across all of these different geographic locations, and they're actually starting to influence policy in those places as well. And we're starting to see, particularly post-pandemic now, with a very large push, as I said earlier, for trying to find new economic growth, an opening for a dialogue between industrial actors and policy regulators and governmental investment to stimulate the take-up. So I think, you know, these things in combination are really interesting in terms of the ability to scale this idea up from something that is theoretical to something that's actually deeply enmeshed into the better growth that we're looking for in the re-emergence of the economy post-pandemic and beyond.
Well, let's get the opinions then of someone who does work for a very, very large, multinational organization. Daniel, SAP, one of the biggest sort of software vendors in the world, revenues in the tens of billions. How can you translate the circular economy principles into, hard business principles from your perspective?
Important is that we understand what is needed from a, let's call it, or simplify the language, from a data perspective. And just referring to the packaging topic, yeah, plastics is so different. One plastics is extremely different. During a panel discussion, learned from Coca-Cola, they learn now that the white bottles, PET bottles, are much easier to recycle compared to the green or brown bottles from the past. So, and data transparency is needed. So what we need to do, because our systems are used by our customers in the past in order to reduce waste and to be as efficient as possible with resources, material resources, but as well financial resources or human resources. But focusing on the material resources now with circular economy, we need to think about how to ensure from the very first beginning that there is no waste at all in the process. So you need to overcome the boundaries of a company. So moving away from, oh, my production plant and avoiding waste there. What happens with the product when the product leaves the gate, and is used? And then you need to bring together, and that is why I focus here on the business networks, really the different players together, like I laid out with consumer industry or retail, packaging, waste management, and so on. Regulation is unfortunately still complex, but we need to think about as well to create transparency about data when it comes to chemical recycling, which is quite energy intense. That is why Andrew is right, we need renewables for that. And then we have a strong link. I heard numbers between 40 to 60% contribution to reducing greenhouse gas emissions if we apply the design principles of circularity. And for us, that is crucial that we understand that. And just currently in parallel, we have the steering committee at SAP happening. And I asked the delegate to join in on my behalf that meeting, where we have the different lines of business at SAP working together, applying the learnings from our co-innovation partners, from the customers, the Unilevers, Coca-Colas, IKEAs of the world, and bring this understanding back to our core systems, our solutions. And we really cover with our products portfolio the entire value chain of our customers, and transforming that to value chains across industry boundaries, that is crucial. So we need to embed really the data in our systems to create the transparency and connect that to financial information as well, or to social indicators as well. And I'm happy to provide different examples with regard to that, what that means in the discussion.
Great, thank you, Daniel. Tim, coming back to you, let's go back to the creative side of things. Do you think of the circular economy really as a really exciting design challenge, as a creative opportunity? It's almost like a new frontier of creativity.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it resets the constraints for design, right? And really, I mean, design is all about constraints, and when the conditions shift, the opportunity for radical change emerge. And obviously right now we're going through a moment where so many of the conditions in which our systems exist are shifting at every level, as Andrew mentioned a little earlier. But I think that ends up revealing opportunities for all kinds of creativity. I think we're at a moment, for instance, when nobody really knows what all the solutions are going to be, right? It's not like we're just simply rolling out recipes that we understand. There's still lots and lots of discovery that has to go on, lots and lots of innovation that leaves open opportunities for entrepreneurialism. It leaves open opportunities who've got creative ideas, not just creative product ideas, but creative business ideas to try new things. I'll give you one example. we spent some time collaborating with a number of the large organizations like Starbucks and McDonald's, with Ellen MacArthur Foundation and an organization out of New York called Closed Loop Partners, looking out across the world for all of the innovations that were emerging around replacing the disposable coffee cup. And rather than saying, hey, IDEO is going to put a bunch of designers together and we're going to solve the problem, we're going to look everywhere in the world to see where there might be interesting experiments going on. We found all kinds of really fascinating new materials innovations. We found service innovations, and we gathered the best of those together and supported them through an accelerator program and then piloting of some new solutions, all really early, all supported by these large organizations. And some of which hopefully will end up becoming large scale and make a difference to how many of those paper coffee cups we use, which is over 1 billion a day, I think, at the moment. That's just one example. There are so many places where there's an opportunity for experimentation and entrepreneurship, and I think designers are often very good at that, especially when they team up with people from other disciplines. And then there are tremendous opportunities for designers that are working in large corporations today to show alternatives. Design is about imagining how the world might be, and there are so many opportunities. Design's always done that, and designers in large corporations have always brought alternative approaches, new ideas to the rest of the organization. And there's so much opportunity to do that, whether it's around packaging, whether it's around the role that digital plays in circularity, whether it's around new service ideas. There's just so many places. And Andrew's team did some research last year or year before, I can't remember now, Andrew, you'll have to remind me, and came to the view that there's something like 160 million people in essentially design decision-making roles in the world. Not all of those are kind of paid up registered designers in their own minds, but they are making design decisions. If we could get the vast majority of those people to realize that there's a creative opportunity, an opportunity to innovate, an opportunity to make slightly different decisions, to show their colleagues what's possible, we're capable of creating tremendous change. To go back to your original question, we're seeing creativity bubble up all over the place. Designers are very passionate about this idea, young designers particularly. In design schools, I mean, there's not a design school anywhere on the planet today that isn't seeing circularity as being one of its major focus areas, and the vast majority of design students want to see a future where they can be designers in a world which allows them also to be sustainable.
Thanks, Tim.
Can I just add to that? I think the interesting piece on that design, as you point out, Tim, is the service design and the interconnection of that to the digital piece and the business model redesign. I mean, it's really interesting. If we don't think about this necessarily as products or materials, but how do we meet needs better, and how do we actually, how does design give people better choices, really? And a lot of that can be non-material, in a sense that we can provide service approaches and digital approaches and just information services that can meet needs without needing to actually have materials in the game at all. So, and we're finding that that's even in topics like fintech and others, the possibility of playing a role in giving people better choices is really interesting and inspiring as well for some of the digital designers.
Yeah, there's some very interesting, stuff that I must admit to barely understand. I'm not even sure I totally do understand some of the fintech innovation that's going on these days. But when we see some of the approaches that have been taken and using some of the distributed web technologies, it allows new kinds of cooperative organizations to exist with new kinds of governance that allow you to imagine, particularly in the food space. We're seeing lots of innovation going on around new types of food cooperatives, for instance, that connect production to consumption. I think we'll see, and that's something that designers, whenever we do run a lot of open challenges through our Open Idea platform, and whenever we do anything on food, we get enormous take up because people are interested in food and creativity, so I think we're going to see a lot of innovation in that area over the next few years.
Lena, I'd love to bring you in right now. A lot of talk about digital and data. I guess one of the sort of like the real challenges though is measurement. What kind of metrics do you have in place to judge sort of success for your products in terms of circularity?
So we've used several. I mean, we use our democratic design actually, and then we use a sort of a score on the circularity, which is just a tool because the circularity is also a mindset of trying to understand what we can do with to look at different scenarios. How, if this product would be used this way or that way, how would it actually change the design? But I would like to bring in the other aspect of digital, because a lot of the digital is also in how we meet customers in the new ways in the future. But do not forget the upstream part. I think a lot of the digital solutions is also to understand the material and material roadmap. That's where we also can see the digital support moving forward. At IKEA, we have material roadmaps that are over 10 years to know that when we are looking into renewable materials, how long will they grow, how much need to be replanted, and all of that material knowledge could also be accessible for the designers if we set it up in a good way from a circular point of view. So I would say that using the potential, we have lots of potential that is not there yet, but we can also see the possibilities already by connecting the systems that we have digitally in order to design better products.
Thank you. Maybe Daniel, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I think measuring is super interesting because you design a paper napkin and you design a couch or a sofa bed. And of course, you will measure them differently depending on what the criteria is for that, because they can't necessarily have the exact same circular design criteria.
And from the perspective of a large, enterprise software company, can you just give us a sense on how you think digital technology can enable the transition?
Yeah, and I would like to build, Greg, on what just Lena laid out, because it is, of course, we need to enable through our system the responsible sourcing, of the materials. Then we need to enable the responsible production, and during the production process. Then we need to think about enabling the resource recovery and the reuse, by providing, as an example, geospatial insights, waste insights on downstream material flows, to understand then the opportunities to drive interventions and secondary material sourcing. And then we talked about that as well, and engaging consumers and citizens, with the insights, creating the transparency they need to make more responsible purchase and disposal decisions. So you see through the entire value chain, we need to provide data with data transparency. We need to accelerate that movement towards circularity by really creating that transparency, covering various insights, the ingredients of a product, but as well how a product was made. So I refer as well to them of the social aspects of human rights, of labor standards we need to consider here as well.
Thank you. Tim, just thinking about the creative side again, I'm sure there's plenty of young designers, people studying, maybe watching this session. What do you think the primary ways in which designers are able to enable the circular economy in practice?
Well, I mean, many. I know it can be. Sometimes it can feel either overwhelming or the designers don't always feel like they've got the power to explore new alternatives, perhaps if they're working in large corporations and things. I think, as I mentioned a little earlier, I believe there's an awful lot of opportunity for the combination of creativity and entrepreneurialism in the circular economy. A lot of designers and creative people like to set up their own companies, their own organizations, and develop new things. And I think there's tremendous opportunities to do that in areas, whether it might be around food, around packaging, around products that are inherently more circular, around systems, services that help make products more circular. So I would encourage designers to explore those opportunities. I think for those of us who are working perhaps with larger organizations, I think it's all about the questions we ask. Designers have always had a habit of making life a little uncomfortable for the folks that they work for by asking awkward questions. And that's part of the role of design, is to ask awkward questions and perhaps provide alternative ways of thinking. And I would encourage, that's often where design creates its greatest value. And sometimes it takes many attempts at that before you change the point of view of an organization or a management team. But we can point to countless examples of that happening through design in various ways around various topics over the decades. And so I would encourage designers who are working inside larger organizations to be a little radical and ask different questions and propose different solutions, just to get people thinking differently. And I believe that if, as a designer or as teams of designers, you are thinking, how do we create the most value here? How do we create the most value, not only for the company, but for the end consumer, for society, by thinking in a circular way? You will get to solutions that are genuinely good and genuinely better for everybody. And business isn't stupid. When business leaders see opportunities to create more value, they'll invest. It can be tricky. It can be particularly tricky in moments like this, where we're taking rather a short-term view because of the challenges we're facing through the pandemic. But also, we've never had clearer illustrations of how fragile our old systems were. Right? Supply chains breaking, difficulty connecting various pieces of the system together when some of the things that we relied on suddenly went away. And so that's a tremendous opportunity for thinking about alternatives that might work better in the future. So I would say, think about being entrepreneurial, think about asking different kinds of questions and proposing different solutions in order to help nudge or show your organization the way to go. Also, be rigorous. I mean, this is hard stuff, and we do have to remember to ask our questions about our own design approaches. Just because something has a cool piece of functionality or it looks great, but maybe uses some extra materials, that's not necessarily a good solution. So we've got to remember to analyze our own work and question some of our approaches of the past. But I think there are so many places that we can get started as designers.
Great, thanks, Tim. We're pretty much out of time now, but maybe just to sum up, Tim sort of just talked about how we can create the most value. Maybe Andrew, Daniel, and Lena, you can just give us your sort of brief thoughts on how do we create the most value from your point of view.
Well, I'd just like to build on what Tim was talking about, because he and I and others in IDEO have talked about the importance of inspiration and stories that help people really orient towards this type of design. And we have been working to collate a lot of these stories. We had a summit last week, as we were talking about before we came live. So I just point people to our summit, our website, and our summit materials. There's a lot of design stories that we brought to life last week, which are very contemporary and I think inspiring. And so that's, you create value through the inspiration and an application of that. And the other thing is we've talked about before, Tim, is the tools that people need in order to apply the discipline. And together with IDEO, we created a design toolkit, and I would encourage people to look at the toolkit and the tools that are available to help you to bring the inspiration to life. There's so much value there to be had, to be honest. It requires a bit of imagination, inspiration, and application of disciplines and tools that exist.
Great, thanks, Daniel. Final word from you, and then Lena, please.
Yeah, from my side, I would like to build on what was just mentioned by Tim and as well Andrew, encouraging the designers to think out of the box and to challenge as well. And Tim, you brought up the example of the mugs and being produced from different materials for coffee. So in such a case, a designer should challenge the business model. We need to think of business models, and why not bringing your own mug and getting a cheaper coffee? Yeah, things like that kind of thinking is needed in order really to radically change, and radical change is urgently needed. And I would like to encourage the audience here in today's meeting to have a look at 2 concrete examples, because examples could be always very inspiring. One is With the COP26, we have that Waste Insight project where we work together with Topolytics and Zero Waste Scotland, yeah, where we use different aspects of digitalization in order to make a difference. Or please have a look at the digital solution we pilot now with the waste picker communities, piloting that in Ghana, where we work together with the World Economic Forum and the UN Development Program. Yeah, without going to the details, but I believe that is really needed from us to create examples which will inspire the designer community to do the things differently in the future.
Thank you. Lena, final word from you, please.
Sure. First of all, I think what is the opportunity now with designers is that they can show what good looks like. And that is not just a theoretical part, but really show the good examples. And we can see, as Tim mentioned, so many great creativity and ideas in this that we could scale up. So really take the new way of thinking. I know often when we talk about circularity, we get the questions, well, this has happened for ages. This is nothing new. And I agree with that in many aspects. There has been recycling, there has been buyback programs, there has been many different solutions, but this is really the big shift into something new. So I would also inspire people to think about it in a new way rather than just the traditional take back, buyback, recycling. That's just one part of it. We need to do a whole systemic change, and the designers are heroes in this one. So I look forward to that.
The designers are heroes. I'm sure that's great. Sorry, did you want to say something?
Just one other thing I forgot to mention. We have a design community on LinkedIn, which is a really great place for people to exchange on as well. And I think part of this is really getting people connected up so they can share the stories and share the leading practices.
Great, thank you so much, the four of you, for sharing your thoughts today. Great way to kick off the week. If you're thinking about joining other sessions, tomorrow there's Circular Design Project session on materials. On Wednesday, the built environment. Thursday, it's fashion. And then Friday, it's food and drink. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully see you for the session tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.